This week we are kicking off this brand new series of sermons entitled Turn, Turn, Turn. And I want to start it off with a confession. It's one that comes with the territory of my now being firmly planted in my middle-aged man era. My ears don't work as well as they used to. This isn't a massive problem most of the time, but it does become glaringly obvious to me in one specific setting, a crowded room. Now, a few of you can maybe relate to this and can understand my situation. When there is a lot of background chatter going on in a space, I am less and less able to filter that noise out to hear the specific words being spoken to me. The most frustrating and sometimes funny example of this happens right here in this room at church most Sunday mornings. I love to greet our congregation before the service, and I'll be moving around the room talking to many of you, and you'll often share a wee update with me or something that's going on for you, or maybe a struggle or perhaps a funny story from your week. But if I can't get myself close enough to actually hear what you are saying over the noise of the background chatter in the rest of the room, I just have to smile and nod politely, hoping with all of my heart that my that's wonderful is the correct and appropriate response to whatever you have just shared with me. I mean, it's frustrating, isn't it? When the noise is too loud, the message gets lost. Meaningful communication is drowned out by all the other noise over which we have little to no control. We live in a loud world. In fact, one of the defining characteristics of our times is the sheer volume of things that are vying for our attention. It's not just loud in an audible sense, it's loud in a spiritual and in a cultural sense too. We are living in noisy times. That noise can be so loud that it gets in the way of us knowing and experiencing the peace and the clarity that a deep-rooted faith promises to us. Think for a moment about the volume dial of your life right now. What's cranked up? There's the noise of global instability, the constant, heartbreaking drone of war and injustice that's all over our headlines. There's the noise of information overload. So many different voices from so many different media outlets and social media feeds, all shouting that they have the truth, they have the answer, they have the ultimate outrage. Then there's the noise of political chaos, division, accusation, and fear that seems to make thoughtful dialogue all but impossible. And perhaps the most persistent noise of all, and unique for us, is the distracting noise within ourselves. The noise of our own confusion, our grief, our anxiety, our pain. The noise of our struggle as we try to keep pace with a world that seems to be changing at a rate faster than anything we could ever dream of keeping up with. This is the bottom line. We live in a noisy world, and all this noise does is distract us from listening for and connecting with the one voice that matters most. Now, we're not the first generation to feel this way. The world was a deeply noisy place during the turmoil of the late 1960s, right? It was a terrifyingly loud place when global war broke out in the early 20th century. And at countless other moments throughout history, every generation has had its own brand of chaos, distraction, and noise. This series, Turn, 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 it's an invitation to recalibrate our lives in a way that connects us with Christ, who is our peace, connecting us with him in a noisy world. So today, week one, we are literally talking about what it is to turn down the noise. Next week, Pastor Rachel will challenge us to turn off the screens. And then in week 3, I'll be back to talk about how vital it is that we turn towards each other. The goal of this series is to challenge us all to move from distraction to devotion, from anxiety to assurance, from isolation to community. Today we turn to a powerful ancient text written for people living in a time just as loud, just as dangerous, and just as politically fraught as our own times. We're going to Psalm 46. Now, this psalm is ultimately a hymn of trust, but initially it describes a world that is in utter breakdown. The opening verses: God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake at the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. Can you imagine that scene? Natural disasters like that sound a lot like earthquakes and tsunamis. And then there is also the political upheaval and military threat that's going on at this time. The very foundations of the psalmist's world seems to be collapsing. This is the very definition of a terrifying, noisy world. But into the midst of all of this chaos, the psalmist offers a radical countercultural call that invites a dramatic shift in perspective. The psalm stops describing the chaos and invites its readers instead to anchor themselves in the deep reality of God's presence in the world. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. We read that in verse 7. The core message of Psalm 46 is not a suggestion to just ignore the noise of the world around. Actually, it's a command to recenter ourselves in spite of it. It doesn't deny the presence of chaos. It asserts the greater presence of God with us right in the middle of that chaos. And this all then culminates in that most famous and perhaps the most challenging verse in the entire psalm, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Be still. Be still. The original Hebrew word used here is rapha, and it can be translated as to slacken, to let go, to sink down, or to cease striving. This is a command to stop the internal frantic struggle. It is an active choice to cease our anxious striving and our grasping for control. This is a command to turn down the noise. Now, the noise of our times, well, it demands constant action, doesn't it? Work harder, argue louder, scroll faster, worry more. It tells us that if we just keep struggling, just keep going, we can fix things. But rapha, this ancient Hebrew command from Psalm 46, it says the opposite. It says stop, let go, cease striving, be still. This is an invitation to surrender. Be still. We don't still ourselves somehow to earn God's favor. We still ourselves to recalibrate our awareness of God. And this awareness isn't just some kind of intellectual awareness. It's more than that. It is experiential. It is the deep, abiding certainty that the God who holds the mountains and who calms the storm is our refuge and our strength. Cultivating stillness like this in our lives, it's a radical, countercultural trust in God's goodness, faithfulness, strength, and power. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's a great word, Pastor Charlie. Truly it is. But I just have this one question. How? How do we do this? How do we actually do this? How do we turn down the noise in our lives and cultivate this kind of stillness? Great question. It is not enough for us to simply wish that the world would get quieter. Turning down the noise around us requires intentional, disciplined action. Now, for me, one of the loudest sources of noise in my life for the longest time was actually news media. For as long as I can remember, I have been a current affairs junkie. I loved keeping up with what was going on in the world around. I even enjoyed the back and forth debate that we would see on news and current affairs shows. I happily would tell myself that this was all about being an informed citizen and being a responsible pastor because of that. But then late last year, I began to recognize that all of this was doing absolutely nothing for me. I started to recognize that this wasn't really information for me, it was just noise. It was a distracting, draining, and ultimately unproductive part of my life. So I made a deliberate decision to turn down the noise. And I watch now considerably less news. In that time, I have become very selective regarding the frequency with which I watch any news media and the quality of the news sources that I now engage with. The result of that action? A peacefulness has come with that decision. The world is still turbulent. I'm aware of that for sure, but my soul is less turbulent. I am no less informed about the things that truly matter, but I am much less burdened by the things that only really sought to stir up fear and distraction within me anyway. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Is there anywhere in your life where you are mistaking noise for information? Is there one external source, a news channel, a social media feed, a podcast that you need to consciously and deliberately turn down or even mute this week? But also, I don't think that simply turning down the noise is the only response that we're invited to make in this psalm. I think that Psalm 46 also invites us to take a serious look at our daily Christian practices. This past summer, I had the opportunity to hold up a mirror in front of my own spiritual life. And what I saw was that my quiet time actually wasn't quiet at all. It was often frantic. A checklist of things to read or to pray for. And it was always rushed so that I could then get on with the rest of the day's demands. Sound familiar? I realized that something had to change. My morning devotions had to become the place where my deepest intention was to make space and to clear the way in my mind and in my heart for God's grace to abound. It needed to be the place where I actually practiced being still. So over the last few months, that time has now become the most protected space in my life. It is a time of devotion and openness to God that is truly shaping how I move into the rest of the day. It has become a place of joyful communion with God that I don't want to miss. And all of this simply because I stopped trying so hard and I started being still. Quite literally, this is the space where I turn down the noise of everything else and allow myself to be still and to know or to be reminded that God is God. I share this with you today because I believe that this is the single most vital work that we can do for our souls right now. The call to action from Psalm 46 is not an option. It is a necessity. Make the quiet place a daily retreat. Retreating to the quiet place to be still every day is the vital work, my friends. I'm not talking about finding an extra 5 minutes to read another verse of the Bible while the coffee brews. No, I am talking about establishing a protected, non-negotiable, intentional period of daily stillness in our lives. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is the ultimate act of strength. And when we turn down the noise, we don't become less aware of the world's problems, but we do become better equipped to live our lives well and faithfully in the midst of them. When we create that daily space of stillness, we cultivate within ourselves and within our lives a peace that is not the absence of trouble, but is the presence of God with us in the midst of it all. We stop hearing the media's anxious opinion about our lives, and we start hearing the Spirit's gentle assurance. We stop seeing the world through the lens of political chaos, and we start seeing it through the lens of God's loving presence in the world and of God's mission in the world. We stop fighting our own anxieties, and we start resting in the profound truth of this psalm, that the Lord of hosts is with us, and that the God of Jacob is our refuge. The promise of Psalm 46 is that God will be exalted in the nations, that God will be exalted in the earth. That's God's work. Our work, our single profound act of faith today and every day, is simply this: to create time and space in which we can turn down the noise, be still, and know that God is God. So I issue a challenge to you all this week. The challenge is to turn down the noise in your lives. Respond to those questions I asked in the last few moments. Is there one channel or podcast or social media feed that you just need to take a break from this week, to turn down the noise? And then the other part of the challenge is not only turning down the noise of our lives, but creating that intentional space daily, where you can sit in the presence of God, in the stillness and in the quietness, in a way that reminds you that God is with us and that God never leaves nor forsakes us, and that God's grace is sufficient for all our needs. If you're still wondering how to do that, friend, send me an email this week. If you've got my number, give me a call or shoot me a text. Let's talk about how we can teach you how to sit in that stillness, how to cultivate and create that stillness in a way that is going to be good for your soul and by extension, therefore, good for the world around you. May it be so in all our lives this week, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.